19 hours. That's all it took. 19 hours ago, Donald Trump stood in front of cheering supporters, smiling like a man untouchable. The cameras flashed. The music blasted. He told the crowd the courts had nothing left, that the cases were collapsing, that he was winning. And then, the ruling landed. Quietly. Suddenly. For words buried inside a federal filing that made lawyers across Manhattan stop mid-sentence and stare at their screens. Immediate enforcement may proceed. And just like that, the clock changed sides. Inside Trump's legal world, people didn't panic loudly. They panicked quietly. Phones started vibrating across conference tables. Attorneys who had been publicly confident just hours earlier were suddenly asking different questions behind closed doors. Not can we win, but how much time do we have? Because this wasn't another headline. This wasn't another indictment his team could spin into a fundraising email. This was different. The court wasn't talking about the future anymore. It was talking about now. And that's where the story breaks. Because for decades, Trump operated on one belief above all else: delay is power. If you can stretch time, you can survive anything. Lawsuits, investigations, debt, scandal. Stall long enough and eventually the pressure moves somewhere else. Witnesses disappear. Narratives change. People get tired. That strategy built an empire. But this time, something snapped. The judges started compressing deadlines. Extensions vanished. Motions got denied faster than expected. Legal analysts watching the docket noticed it immediately. The court wasn't just handling the case anymore. It was hunting for an ending. And Trump's team saw it happening. That's the part nobody says out loud. They knew the runway was shrinking. They threw everything at the wall anyway. Constitutional arguments. Emergency appeals. Challenges to the penalties. Attacks on the judge. Delay after delay after delay. The same playbook that had worked for 40 years. But then came the mistake they never thought would matter. The bond wasn't finalized. The compliance wasn't complete. Critical paperwork missed the window. Not because they couldn't do it, but because they thought the court would blink first. It didn't. And in that instant, the entire tone changed. One veteran appellate attorney reportedly described the ruling with a single word: extraordinary. Because courts almost never move this aggressively against someone this powerful during an active presidential campaign. But here's what makes this moment dangerous. The ruling didn't erase the fraud findings. It left them standing. Persistent and egregious fraud. Those words remained untouched. What changed was the enforcement timeline. Immediate. Not later. Not after appeals. Immediate. Which meant one terrifying thing for Trump's inner circle. Letitia James no longer had to wait. Somewhere in New York tonight, teams are already preparing documents most Americans will never see. Asset evaluations. Property assessments. Financial maps tracing ownership structures through layers of corporations. Quiet preparations that started months ago suddenly activated by one judicial decision. And then, silence. The kind of silence that tells you everyone in the room understands exactly what's coming next. Because this isn't just about money anymore. That's the mistake people make when they hear the number. Hundreds of millions of dollars sounds enormous. But the real threat isn't the amount. It's the chain reaction. Banks start hesitating. Lenders step back. Insurance companies recalculate risk. Deals freeze. Relationships vanish without warning. In the real estate world, reputational collapse moves faster than legal collapse. And Trump's empire survives on movement. Financing. Leverage. Negotiation. Momentum. Immediate enforcement throws sand into all of it at once. Meanwhile, publicly, Trump did exactly what everyone expected. He attacked the judge. Called the ruling political. Called it corrupt. Called it unconstitutional. His supporters heard persecution. His critics heard accountability. But inside the legal machinery, none of that mattered. Rage doesn't stop enforcement. Speeches don't freeze court orders. And that's the part making this situation feel different from everything before. Then came the detail almost nobody noticed. Buried deep inside the procedural language was a ticking clock. 60 days. A narrow window where enforcement actions could begin while appeals technically continued. Legal experts instantly understood what that meant. If assets move, if control changes hands, if receivers step in before the appeal concludes, the damage may become irreversible even if Trump later wins part of the case. Think about that for a second. You can win legally, and still lose practically. That realization hit Trump's legal team like a freight train. Emergency motions started flying into court almost immediately. Requests for clarification. Attempts to narrow enforcement authority. Efforts to slow the machine before it fully accelerated. But James' office pushed back just as fast. Weekends suddenly disappeared. Courts started working through them. That almost never happens. And when judges start sacrificing weekends for one case, people inside the system know something unusual is unfolding. Which leads to the question nobody around Trump wants to answer publicly. Could he actually lose properties? Not theoretically. Not rhetorically. Physically. Could buildings carrying the Trump name become vulnerable? A year ago, most legal analysts would have laughed that off. 6 months ago, they would have called it unlikely. Tonight? The answer has changed. Quietly. Uncomfortably. But unmistakably. Could happen. And that possibility is what transformed this from a legal battle into a political thriller. Because once enforcement becomes visible, the entire country sees it differently. A court filing is abstract. A receiver walking into Trump Tower is not abstract. Cameras outside buildings. Reporters gathering at entrances. Financial records pulled into public view. The spectacle flips direction. Trump built his entire career mastering media attention. Controlling the frame. Dominating the cameras. But now the cameras may capture something he cannot spin away in real time. And here's the twist nobody expected. Even some legal scholars who believe the original penalties were excessive are now worried about the speed of enforcement itself. They're asking a dangerous question. What if the appeals court eventually modifies the judgment after irreversible damage has already been done? What if enforcement changes the empire before the final legal answer arrives? Suddenly, even critics of Trump are debating whether the system itself is entering uncharted territory. And when both sides start sounding nervous, you know the ground is shifting underneath everyone. Right now, somewhere behind closed doors, advisors are calculating scenarios they never thought they'd seriously discuss. What assets are exposed? Which lenders stay loyal? What happens if enforcement teams appear publicly? What happens if Republican leadership stays silent? Watch that carefully. Silence will tell you more than speeches. Watch the fundraising numbers. Watch the movement around New York properties. Watch whether ownership structures suddenly change. Because if assets begin moving around quietly, that means the fear inside Trump's operation is real. And Letitia James already warned what happens next if that occurs. Not civil consequences. Criminal referrals. That's where the temperature changes. That's where the story stops feeling like politics and starts feeling like history unfolding in real time. The delays are ending. The machinery has started moving. And the most powerful thing about this moment isn't the ruling itself. It's that nobody, not Trump, not his allies, not the courts, not even his opponents, fully knows what happens when the machine reaches full speed. The next development could arrive tomorrow morning, or in the next hour. But one thing is certain now. The word immediate changed everything. And once a system like this starts moving in public, it rarely stops quietly.